Good morning and welcome to another Hidden Histories. Today we're going to be looking for a hard to find aspect of East Anglian history, the Anglo-Saxon era. There's a lot of old stuff in England, you see it all over the place, but it's rare that you see anything that dates before the early 11th century before the conquest. Today we're going to explore a little bit about why that is, and we're going to hunt down some of those elusive remaining standing structures from a bygone age. Let's head out. Our first stop is here, St. Andrew's Church in the village of Dunham. Here we're going to accomplish two things. One, we're going to talk a little bit about why a lot of Saxon architecture doesn't still exist. And two, we're going to get the opportunity to look at some classic Saxon architectural style in stone. So here's the thing, it's that stone connection that's the problem. The overwhelming majority of Saxon architecture was wood. Stonework was considered a lesser craft. That was replaced in the Norman era when the Normans came over from France, brought stone cutters and started building stuff out of stone. And no surprise, things made out of stone last a lot longer than things made out of wood. This doorway here is our first hint. These triangular topped arches are a classic Saxon style. This corner is made in a style called long and short coining. It goes all the way up the tower. This is how the corners of the nave are built as well. And this style is rare elsewhere and indicative of Saxon masonry. There's more to see inside, but it's locked. These things happen. Anyway, we've got a lot of ground to cover, so we're gonna head on down the road. It was really cool. It's too bad we didn't get to go inside, but it's time to move on. Our next stop is only about 1.5 miles away. I'll see you there. You can see the tower over there to our right, and that's where we're heading. Norfolk is known for round tower churches. The round tower, typically Saxon, made out of flint. This is supposed to be from 950 and potentially the oldest one in Norfolk. Here again we have more of the long and short coining here on the edge of the nave. But the big appeal here is the tower. Now we're going to move on to North Elmham, the biggest hit of this part of the tour so far. Can't wait. North Elmham Church has a long history. This was the site of an early Saxon wooden cathedral, apparently a substantial and monumental thing. Later converted into a Norman chapel, and then finally into a castle. And you're seeing the entrance to that behind me here. You can sort of see the plan of the Norman chapel behind me, but the key thing that you're not seeing is the Anglo-Saxon cathedral. We continue to see more and more examples of the Anglo-Saxon presence simply vanished from the landscape. Before this chapel was built by the bishop, by the Norman bishop, he knocked down the wooden cathedral. It's part of the great rebuilding that took place after the conquest, and which is why, a key reason why it's so hard to find any existing Saxon stuff left. So we're not going to find anything visibly Saxon here. But it's a beautiful day, it's a cool ruin, so let's go check it out anyway. Check that out. Roman brick? I think so. So some detail I didn't get into earlier is that there has been some variability in the consensus about what this thing actually is. Some early studies suggested that we were not walking around a Norman chapel, but instead we were in the Saxon cathedral itself. More recent studies and scholarship have largely overturned that and convincingly demonstrate that this in fact is a later Norman build. There have been some much more recent arguments made locally that this should be considered a Saxon cathedral. It's probably safe to say there were people with Saxon skills, abilities, and there probably were some Saxon technologies referenced or used in the construction of this. So for me, I'm gonna say I'm standing in a Norman chapel. Okay, I know what you're thinking. That chapel was cool, but it wasn't Saxon. In fact, we've seen some things that might be Saxon, might be pre-conquest, but we haven't seen anything that is definitively built before the Norman invasion. So, let's cut to the main event. Let's go to Sutton Hoo.
Turn right after 150 yards.
We're at Sutton Hoo. I'm walking out right now to the big burial ground full of important Saxon burials. The most important of which, Burial 1, was a massive ship burial for an important Saxon, probably Redwald, a king who died in 624 or 625 AD. Some of the artifacts that are found in his tomb include gleaming swords and shields and his famous helmet. The real ones are on display in the British Museum if you wanted to take a look at those things. But they have replicas in the on-site display here, which are probably better. They're shinier, they're newer, they're not 1,000 years old. Unlike the Saxons behind the churches that we've seen and will see, the Saxons behind those were Christians. Redwald was not. Although he was king right around the time that Christianity was arriving on this island, and I believe he even had some Christian-style artifacts buried with him, which are probably more like souvenirs or prizes than actual devotional objects. The Burial 1 ship was held together by primitive rivets. The way they were made is a nail was driven through two pieces of wood, and on the other side, a washer called a rove was placed over the nail, and then it was hammered over flat. It was these rivets that Basil Brown found and helped him identify the shape of the ship. Amazing. The site of Sutton Hoo is an unmatched archaeological site in England. There's more than 20 Royal Saxon burials here, including Burial 1, which was, luckily for all of us, the most intact and best preserved one, because the looters had missed it. There's also a later cemetery related to executions from the late Saxon, early Norman time. Creepy. There's so much going on here. When the wind blows, the viewing tower wobbles noticeably. Time to head down. Boy, there is nowhere like Sutton Hoo. That's something else. All right, it's 5 o'clock. We've made it through a lot of the day. We're about 2 hours from our next and final stop for the day, St. Peter's on the Wall down in Essex. Let's hit the road. So we've made our way out to the Essex coast, and we are heading towards St. Peter on the Wall, just up ahead. This church, incredibly, was built about 20 years after Redwald was buried at Sutton Hoo. It's one generation. What a change from the pagan king with his Scandinavian-style ship burial to a Christian church. Things were changing rapidly at this time. Before the Saxons were out here, the Romans were here. And the Romans built a series of fortifications along the coast here, the so-called Saxon coast. Defensive fortifications against Saxon raids. When the Romans left, there was nothing to stop the Saxons from coming in, and they did, and they took over. Now obviously that happened well before this church was built. But when it was put together, St. Ced, who'd come down from Lindisfarne, co-opted that Roman authority in a way by literally building this church on a residual piece of Roman wall from one of those Saxon shore forts. We'll take a look at that. I was kind of hoping it would be a little more obvious where on the side of the church the old Roman wall was. Apparently it was about about here, about where I'm standing. It occurred to me that as soon as I said, boy, I wish you could see the wall, that you can absolutely see the wall. Over here, there's a clear ridge of soil that goes along and it connects up to the seawall over here. It's probably about the same height, maybe it's a little lower, but it is obviously, it's the remains of the wall collapsed with wall fall on either side, making this mound. And you can see that the church is just smack bang on it. So when I say it's on the Roman wall, it's not like on a segment of wall like I was thinking, like a wall, that you can see. It's like on the hump where the wall was, is where the church is. Like the whole church is on the wall. That's amazing. Good morning. Stayed the night last night here in Essex, near the coast, and we're going to try to hit 2 more churches on our drive today. It's going to be complicated. The weather is turning. You can hear the wind probably starting to rain a little bit, and it's Easter and it's Sunday, so it might not be easy to get into these churches. They might be in use, as it were, but we'll see what we can do. Let's head out. This is the unbelievable church of St. Andrew's in Greenstead juxta Ongar. And this wooden wall, it's actually most of the nave, the lower half of it, the wooden wall, remains intact. This is the oldest wooden church on Earth and the oldest wooden building in Europe. Dendrochronological work done recently, actually by Scandinavian archaeologists who one suspects were probably hoping that their stave churches were older than this, determined based on dendrochronology, that is the varying thickness of rings. We have long dendrochronological sequences, and so you can tell with pretty good accuracy when a tree was cut down. They determined that these trees were cut down to build this church right around the time of the conquest. This particular corner beam is exceptionally interesting. If you go on the inside, you can see that it's just been notched. That's how they made the corner of the wall. They just cut it in a little notch. They didn't have 2 sides meet. They just notched a board, bam. And they did the whole thing with axes and adzes. Archaeological work done here in, I want to say the 1960s, found older occupations below the church. Some have theorized that these could have been earlier iterations of the church, which is not unreasonable. Some of the tentative dating on these sites suggested it could have been connected to the work of Saint Ced, who also built the church we looked at yesterday evening. I would take all that with a grain of salt. They're not based on absolute dates. There's a lot of guesswork involved. It's perfectly likely that those earlier remains could have been pagan temples from before the Christian time too, because there was still a pattern of putting Christian churches on pagan sites. But suffice it to say, this has been an important site for the local Saxons all the way through the modern English. Good luck so far. I have to say, that church, St. Andrew's, blows me away every time. We've been here once before. The age of those walls, it's something else. Anyway, time to go. We're gonna go on to our next and final stop of this trip. It is St. Botolph's in Hadstock. St. Botolph's is cool because there are some stories associated with it. Possible stories. We'll get into that. We are in the charming village of Hadstock, standing in front of St. Botolph's Church, an amazing place with an incredible history. First, let's start with the name, St. Botolph. There's a possibility that this church could have some connection to him. St. Botolph himself was a 7th century Christian missionary who went around building churches throughout East Anglia. Could this have been one that he built? Some suggest that not only was this a church he built, but that he was buried here, and there is circumstantial evidence to support that. There are there's archaeological evidence from the 1970s, very, very thin. There was an empty stone tomb on the east side of the church that could vaguely have been his. The church was known in the Domesday Book to have had an exclusive charter to a St. Botolph's fair, which is something. That suggests a real connection to him. And there's a lot of Saxon archaeology in the area, but nothing that points definitively to that connection. So we'll call that a fun story. Maybe implausible, possible. Let's move forward to 1016 for our second story. This is the year of the Battle of Assendam. The Battle of Assendam was a decisive victory. The invading Viking king Canute beat the English, and this led within months to his total control over the country of England. That battle is said to have taken place nearby this very church, and some suggest that this church may have been built by Canute after the battle. Apparently, it's recorded that Canute felt the need to build a massive church for the souls of the Christians on both sides of that conflict who died in the battle. Now, this was a brutal and bloody battle. It seems unlikely that Canute was shedding a lot of tears for the dead English. However, he now had to rule them, and this could have been perhaps a piece of statecraft, a little bit of diplomacy, to convince the locals that, hey, we're all Christians here, come to my nice church, and let's hang out. There are Saxon architectural elements up and down this place, and the nave itself is definitively Saxon. You can tell this because of several windows. There are 4 remaining double-splayed windows, a unique Saxon trait. A double-splayed window is wide on the outside, narrow in the middle, then wide again on the inside. You don't see this at all after the Saxon period. There's a number of other architectural elements. If you look up here, you can see the honeysuckle design on the capital of this column, and up there, that's distinctly Saxon. You see this column has it as well, and all this stonework underneath it, therefore, must also be Saxon. The church itself is an almost intact Saxon facility, and the most exciting part of it is the door. This is probably the oldest operational door in England. It's the door I came into the church from. This is the north side of the church, and this door has been dated convincingly with dendrochronology to sometime between 1040 and 1070 AD, which means it could have been emplaced after the Norman invasion, but it could well have been done beforehand, and is almost certainly Saxon. Fun tie to Sutton Hoo on this door as well. It's a little bit oblique, bear with me, because this is also hundreds of years newer than Sutton Hoo. But if you look at how the door is held together, they're rivets, aren't they? There's a nail driven through the door on the other side, comes out here, through this metal plate, hammered down flat. It's not exactly the same, but it's reminiscent of the same construction techniques that were used to build the ship that Redwald was buried in. A little bit of a stretch, but come on, indulge me that. We've seen coining that looks generally like this on our tour already. This stone, in particular, comes from a place called Barnack, which is more than 70 miles away. Getting these massive heavy stones here involved a trip through sophisticated canal networks, through the fens to get here, put those stones here. It's an excellent, very strong limestone, good for corners. That's why it's here. This, combined with the giant scale of this place, lends credence to that thought that this could have been built by King Canute. An underappreciated little gem of Hadstock Church is this, the west door. We're at the base of the tower, which is 15th century, and apparently the wood is only 15th century. Only 15th century, that's the 1400s. So anyway, new. But the metalwork could very well be Saxon, based stylistically on things like this decorative swirl down here. Inside, the hinges are the same style of hinge as we saw on the inside. And it may well be that this ironwork was too good and too expensive to throw out. And so hundreds of years later, in the 15th century, they went ahead and reused it when they made this door. It's pretty cool. And so with that, we wrap up our tour of Saxon sites here in Hadstock. And I think this site highlights almost more than any of the others the fundamental frustration that I find looking for Saxon sites. There's so much history here. There's so many stories that are just almost certain or supported or hinted at. But even here, on this site with such deep Saxon history, there's very little on the surface that can be definitively said to be pre-Norman. Most Saxon stuff is under the ground, it's archaeological. There's just precious little visible on the surface, which to my mind makes it even more rewarding when you do find those little remaining vestiges. Anyway, I hope you had a good time. Thanks for watching.